That's very, very likely. They're going to, listen, this has got all the marks that we won't take no for an answer. They're going to root him out, and it's not going to be easy to root him out, but as I pointing out in tomorrow's brief, Libya does not have the kind of terrain that lends itself to a long guerrilla war like Afghanistan. So Gaddafi's going to have to stay hunkered down with his Russian weapons and his significant ground forces, his underground bunker systems. The U.S. is going to have to justify an invasion to go and root him out. And I think they're going to have to stage some atrocities to justify this, because right now they're having trouble justifying a lot of the attacks going on in Tripoli, and there are civilian casualties. Hospitals are filling up. So much for the humanitarian perspective. I mean, let's face it, if the U.S. was really worried about humanitarian effect, they'd have invaded Zimbabwe years ago, where you have hundreds of thousands of people under attack. They would have invaded North Korea under humanitarian reasons, but that's just a pretext.
Well, we also see the Marines being sent in, the amphibious landing craft. We're seeing that resolution and Hillary statements about you will accept a humanitarian ground force, or else this has all the makings of a ground invasion.
Great.
All right, let's finish up on where you see that going, the time frame, then we'll shift gears into Fukushima, and that leads us directly into strategic relocation, your PowerPoint presentation. Japanese still admit they're not releasing real radiation levels. They are confirming 1,600 times safe levels up to 20 kilometers away. But finishing up in the few minutes we've got in this short segment, Joel, with Libya, if Obama and NATO and the UN are openly setting up invasion ships, Marine Corps ships, 2,200 more Marines flown in to be put on board those ships, Hillary and others have said, you will accept a humanitarian force on the ground. And they're now saying this isn't a war, though. This is kinetic military action that we're going to continue to attack you. So it's set up to be an occupation, but Obama comes out and says absolutely no occupation. How are they going to shift out of that lie? So I see a staged terror attack or a foiled event, and then they can continue to claim Al-Qaeda in North Africa and in the east of Africa is the pretext, and then African, who's already making statements about this, as you said, can roll in to one country after the next. But how do they do that without the staged terror attack?
Well, I think you're probably right. They've always used staged terror attacks, and they're not beyond using that here. It will be blamed on Al-Qaeda. You know, it's very interesting that Gaddafi tried to use the Al-Qaeda card by saying that it was Al-Qaeda in these other cities, not real opposition. And nobody even gave him the time of day. But when the U.S. says it's Al-Qaeda, everyone believes that it's... the American people are pretty unable to distinguish between this. And this is because I think the media is just in lockstep with these types of things. There just isn't any real opposition out there except in the alternative media. But I think we're going to see an invasion, as you say, because the National Guard has been put on alert. There's going to be certain units taken in there, and I think that's because they want to relieve frontline special forces that will go in as a spearhead and give the appearance of normal soldiers doing they won't call it occupation, but peacekeeping missions. Once again, it'll be a UN peacekeeping mission. But I think that there'll be other provocations. We'll probably see another pirate attack that will justify them going down in. They'll blame the Sudan for something involved here. But I think we haven't seen the end of this long road march down through Africa. And they may well finally, after all these years, take out Zimbabwe too. Because if they get near that region, it certainly is a provocation.
And that's the model. And these weak third-world dictatorships are sitting ducks. This has always been the UN model of humanitarian takeovers when they go in and slaughter people and put in a new gaggle of dictators or plutocrats. I mean, this is the model of the New World Order, invading countries by putting a humanitarian mask on it.
And it explains what my uncle for years pointed out of why are the globalists that are putting in communists into China, communists into Cuba, into Nicaragua, why are the who aren't communists protecting these people in the State Department that are managing these operations? And I've long then figured out it must have been because they want to create world chaos, and they come in and rescue people. Humanitarian occupations in the name of the United Nations and the New World Order, and that's exactly what we're seeing.
Well, that's the great game. That's the British model of destabilizing. Don't let anybody get organized. Don't let anybody have a civilization. Keep it in chaos so that a tiny elite with limited military force who is organized can dominate. Do you concur with that statement, Joel?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, we're going to go to break, and we're going to come back and get into Fukushima. I haven't asked your opinion on this. I don't know it yet, but I'm going to get your view on it, recap some of the news there, and then segue into Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, 3rd edition. He also has reports on foreign safe relocations, countries and areas he thinks, from his deep research, are safe. We'll be right back with Joel Skousen. I'm Alex Jones. Get the book at Infowars.com.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done's been right.
Joel Skousen is our guest for the rest of the hour. He's the editor of World Affairs Brief, worldaffairsbrief.com. I'm Alex Jones, of course, with Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com, and PrisonPlanet.tv. We're done talking about Libya and this big globalist takeover of Africa that they've kicked off with the hypocritical cover story of humanitarianism. Next, we move to Joel Skousen's view and perspective on Fukushima. Now, even the 5th reactor that had been successfully shut down even before the earthquake and subsequent tsunami is now smoking, going back 12 days ago, only a day into this. We're now into day 13. The Japanese admitted partial meltdown. I've had many physicists on, experts in radiation releases. They say that if you're having ion beams shooting out of multiple reactors, that means that fission is going on. If the MOX reactor number 3 that has weapons-grade plutonium in it, 7%, 93% uranium, continues to melt down. And some of these reactors are over 750 degrees Fahrenheit, 400 degrees Celsius. It will purify the plutonium out in one level, the uranium in another, and then other lighter fissile materials on top. If there is any type of explosion, that's how a nuclear weapon uses. They have shaped charges, plastic explosives around the uranium or plutonium and the different variants of weapons. They also have systems where they fire a plutonium bullet into uranium. There's a lot of different systems, but the point is the Russians, in 53, had one of their reactor storage facilities blow up in a nuclear explosion, and we've covered that with physicists and historians in the last 13 days, that there is a real danger, not just of Chernobyl events where it spews even more into the air and it comes across the Pacific to the North America, but an actual nuclear explosion. Do you concur with that analysis, Joel Skousen, from your deep research into nuclear threat, nuclear war? And because, I mean, this is your main forte. That's why, of course, you've written the book, Strategic Relocation, that we're going to start a PowerPoint on as you direct us here via telephone. We'll have that up for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers. But as radio listeners follow along, they should get the book, Strategic Relocation, a huge coffee table book with, the color photos and diagrams and maps. It's just amazing. Again, available at Infowars.com. But your view on Fukushima and where this is going.
Well, I agree with all of that assessment except the last one. I don't very strongly don't believe that it could actually turn into a nuclear explosion. It, at best, would be a dirty explosion based on hydrogen, but even that is unlikely. I'm not giving a Pollyanna scenario here. In fact, we've dodged a bullet because there have not been any high-altitude funeral pyre-type fires like we had at Chernobyl, which essentially didn't have a containment chamber around it.
Sure. Let me stop you, though. Bob Bowman was on here a week and a half ago, 3 degrees in nuclear physics, and he said he didn't think anything would happen at 5 and 6 because they'd already been shut down before the disaster, and now 5 is smoking and having big problems. So it's not possible, as some physicists have said, that there could be an explosion?
Absolutely not possible to have a nuclear explosion. Only a dirty explosion with hydrogen, but not a nuclear explosion. I repeat, that is not true. And
okay, explain that to me, because that's good news.
Because it's extremely difficult to get nuclear particles to explode in a fission-type bomb. It's just very, very difficult. It has to be perfectly done. It has to be perfectly controlled. There's no way when you have all of the mixing in the melting process of zirconium and other things that you're going to get the concentrations of purity that allow. And then you have to have, of course, a tritium trigger or something, very powerful injection of nuclear material into the middle of a controlled, contained mass to set off those types of reactions. Not possible.
Okay, so when they talk about explosions then, because they do call it a dirty fission explosion, I mean, they're having some fission going on just with the melting,
yeah.
So maybe that's where I got confused.
No, but that's fission of a totally different variety. That simply resolves itself in melting. And when you start then melting in top of this is what happened in Chernobyl. You didn't have the containment, the massive amount of steel and concrete around it. So when you start melting the steel of the building and everything, it just turned in. It's just like adding oxygen and flame to a fire. And that's how that stuff got up to 30,000 feet and carried for hundreds and hundreds of miles and even circled the globe. But that's not going to happen here. What we're going to get is a nuclear nightmare into the water around there because the particles coming out, most of it escaping from these containment chambers, are still being mostly filtered. I think that a lot of those filters have been compromised. So we're getting some nuclear release, but most of it's still being contained inside or coming out in the water release drains coming out of this. I'm also afraid that you are correct that we're not out of the woods yet because there are signs this week that their containment, which had leveled off for about 3 or 4 days, is now starting to decrease. The temperatures are rising. The amount of radiation is getting stronger. I think the pools, which they overloaded with spent fuel, are still continuing to heat up and not cooled down, even though some cooling water has been restored in 5 and 6. There are signs that this is getting away from them. Now, I still don't believe it would be a Chernobyl-type event, but it could be a lot worse, and I think the greatest danger that we're facing is this stuff falling into the ocean, getting into the fish and the seafood, and this going up into Alaska and affecting all of the seafood that comes out of our northern waters.
What's your concern with the 640,000 spent fuel rods they were storing, many of them on top of reactors that have had the big hydrogen explosions? They're admitting that a lot of that did blow into the ocean. They are picking up all sorts of radiation in the food and water, according to the Tokyo News and the Kyoto News, 1,600 times safe levels.
Yeah, they should never have put that many spent fuel rods in that position. That's one of the major mistakes of that design by GE, is to have used that space above the reactors to store those spent fuel rods. And there is a tremendous amount of radioactive material in it. If that stuff starts to boil away, and that's what I'm really worried about, because I think the reactors will contain most of the molten meltdown of those others, except for what gets into the seawater, but not the fuel rods on top. That's what's really in danger.
So, studying this for decades, how do you see it unfolding then?
I still feel that this is going to be at worst, a deadly potential problem for Japan and for the ocean sea life. I repeat, I do not believe we're going to get any significant amounts of radiation in the air because it just hasn't got high enough into the altitude to get there. And in fact, I'm monitoring every single day the numerous, we got 20 or 30 radiation detectors all along the West Coast, and they have not shown one blip upwards yet. So there is.
What about the federal government saying they've seen increases in radiation, but that it's not very high? Not here. That was in the air around Japan. There is no detector, and I'm watching all of them, Alex. There's no detector that's shown any increase whatsoever in radiation carried by the air here. But we're going to have to watch the waters because that current, the Japanese currents, comes up to Alaska and down the West Coast. And that could be the real hidden danger, because whether it's swimming or whether it's fish or anything that comes out of that ocean. Well, here's an example. You know, you go to the Texas coast and coconuts from thousands of miles away wash up or message in a bottle. And I have looked at those currents. They go up and around Alaska down the coast, other currents come up, and if you've got seaweed or plants or fish, we know that stuff goes all over the ocean, and the type of half-life we're talking about with plutonium and uranium, what happens then?
Well, first of all, I think the plutonium part will be kept within the reactor vessel. That's one upgrade from the other reactor vessels. Even though if there's a partial meltdown, I think it's going to be contained. So I don't think we have to worry about plutonium.